Hello everyone, I am Libin Francis, Assistant Professor with Department of History, Sacred Heart College for Women, Chalakudi. Today I am going to take the second part of our modern Indian history, the arrival of various European companies in India, their contestations to establish the supremacy in India, and the final victory of British East India Company, who established their monopolistic rule in India and have introduced their policies in India and have exploited our resources and used them for the development of their country, the mother country. Britain, or the imperial power, is termed as the mother country, and the place where they exploit the resources is termed as the colony. So India turned as a colony of Britain, and Britain acted as a so-called, they projected themselves as a benevolent mother country, but actually what happened was the brutal exploitation of our resources, which we are going to deal in the topics in the later sessions. So the first European company came to India was the Portuguese one. Actually, the Portuguese was not a company, but it was directly sponsored by the Portuguese kings because they have several objectives apart from the trade, mainly the evangelization program called Propaganda Fide. So the first company was Portuguese. The first company, or the first country to be exactly, was Portuguese, and the Portuguese under Vasco da Gama landed in Malabar coast in 1498 and established the trade relation with the Zamorin of Kozhikode, and later the Portuguese navigators like Cabral, Francisco de Almeida, Alfonso de Albuquerque, etc. came to India, especially the western coastal, Arabian coastal region, and they established a naval supremacy in the western coastal region, named Estado de India. The name of the empire which Portuguese established in India was termed as the Estado de India, which means the empire in India. They concentrated mainly on the coastal region rather than on the territorial one. They lacked the realization that it was only the territorial gains that would make a country to establish their base for a long time, but they failed to establish so, and that weakness, that fault, was exploited by the European countries who came later after Portuguese. So the first country was Portuguese, and they came in the 1490s, the decade of 1490s, and they established their base in the western coastal region. And the next power was Dutch, who came to India by the time of 1595 and 1600. So what happened to Portuguese, even though they have an advantage of around 100 years before another European company in India, was that they lacked the realization of several types. First one, I have told it that they have concentrated mainly on the coastal region rather than on the territorial one. And the second policy which turned the things against the Portuguese was the evangelization, overzealous or the over ambitious evangelization program they have followed in India. They have converted many people forcefully to Christianity, and the traditional Christianity which existed in the southern region was also turned to be changed by the Portuguese missionaries. And even though they have contributed to India in several ways, especially when they introduced the printing press in Goa, but the evangelization program have people made more reactions against the Portuguese, and that was another reason for the failure of Portuguese after a period of 100 years. The next thing was the Portuguese, the nature of the Portuguese nation, because there were only less than 10 lakhs of people in Portugal, and with that small number of people, they have concentrated at the same time on South America, Africa, and even in Asia, and their military naval number was also comparatively lesser than the Britain, where the population is around 50 lakhs, and so the country with the less population have more ambitions, but they have failed one after the another, including the loss of India. So another reason was the matrimonial relations of Portugal with Britain, where a portion of the Portuguese territory in India was handed over to the British Britain as part of the dowry given to the British prince. So all these factors, including the the strategic lack of strategic vision of establishing a territorial empire in India, the power of the Portuguese declined. By the time of 1590s, where another power which turned to be more powerful, that is Dutch, and soon the Britain. So next competition, the next two countries in the scene were Dutch and British. Both were more monopolistic, more powerful, and have joint stock companies to conduct trade between these Asia and Europe. So the British East India Company and the United East India Company of Netherlands have initially engaged into a rival competition, but later they made an agreement that the Dutch has to be concentrated in the Indies island, East Indies, named Indonesian islands, and Britain to be concentrated in the South Indian region, that is an Indian region, so South Asian region. The competition between Britain and Dutch ended up in a way which is more beneficial for both the powers, because Dutch had got the prominence in the East Indies region where they established their base, and Britain had got the supremacy in the South Asian region in India. So both the powers had later on shared their ships from Europe to and fro. So this was the story of Dutch, and Dutch had bases in both the Malabar coastal region and the Coromandel coastal region, which is the western and the eastern coastal regions respectively. But the case of France was a little different, because France was a latecomer even after Denmark. Denmark had also sent a trading company to India, but they failed to establish their supremacy in a way which was earlier established by the Portuguese, and later Dutch and British. Danish who came to India set up some factories in India in the southern region, but later lost to Britain. Their provisions were lost to Britain by the beginning of the 19th century. Last main European power in the series was the French East India Company, which was established in 1664 by the French monarch of the time, Louis XIV, and the main purpose of the French East India Company was to follow the Britain, because both the countries, Britain and France, were international rivals, and wherever Britain had a colony, Britain had a trading post, France also followed. So for example, the present state of America, the United States of America, was under the hands of Britain, whereas the present Canada, was held by the France. And in the African region, where Britain had a hold in the southern region, and France had followed Britain and established their base in the northern African regions. And same way in India also, where Britain established their base by the beginning of the 17th century. France also followed Britain and established their bases very near to the British trading post. For example, we can see that when Britain established their base in Madras, France followed it and established their base in Pondicherry, which is a few kilometers away from Madras. And in the northern Bengal region, where Britain established their base in the Calcutta, and France in Chandernagar, very close to Calcutta. Whereas in India was mainly held by Britain, France established their base in the Indochina region, that is the Vietnam, Laos, Cambodian region, where the French domination was there until the Second World War period. So what happened in India was a competition between Britain and France, and they were termed as the Anglo-French rivalry in India, and was reflected in the wars of Carnatic, where the Carnatic Nawabs, local rulers in the Carnatic region, engaged in a conflict of mutual nature, backed by the European powers in one side and Britain, and the other side the French. So this is the story of European companies in India, and there is one more company who came to India as part of the trading intention, was the company of Belgium, named as Ostend Company, but they failed miserably to establish their base. So there are several countries including the Ostend Company, and the number goes around 6, but only one company who was able to retain the subcontinent, the major portions of the subcontinent, was the British East India Company. So this is the story of various European powers in India, and the only power which was able to retain majority of the Indian subcontinent was the British East India Company, and later the British Crown after the revolt of 1857. And India adopted a high-end struggle against the British domination in India, and finally gained our independence by the time of 1947. So this was the story. This is the story of the European powers. Thank you.